The story could start with a tense moment from the middle of the story. A scene where Sami is being led out of his office under false accusations, the eyes of his colleagues watching, whispers following him. Sami's mind races, knowing that despite his innocence, the color of his skin and his background have already sealed his fate in the eyes of many. The reader is immediately thrown into the unfairness and tension of the situation, creating a compelling question: how did it come to this? And will justice be served? Before we get started, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more exciting content, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's dive in. The early morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of Sami's modest room, casting faint shadows on the walls. His alarm had gone off nearly 20 minutes ago, but Sami remained seated at the edge of his bed, staring down at the neatly folded clothes he had prepared the night before. Today was important. A test day at school, one that could change the course of his future. But the gnawing anxiety in his stomach made it hard to focus on the excitement of what the day might bring. He could hear his mother bustling about in the kitchen, the familiar clinking of pots and pans offering a brief sense of normalcy. The smell of freshly brewed tea wafted into his room, mingling with the scent of his mother's homemade flatbread, a simple yet comforting reminder of home. "Sami, breakfast is ready," his mother called from the kitchen. "Coming, Mama," he replied, his voice catching slightly. He didn't want her to worry, but it was hard to mask the tension that had been building up for weeks. He had always been the pride of the family, the one who worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and made good grades. But no matter how hard he tried, there was a feeling he couldn't shake, an awareness of the unspoken barrier that stood between him and his classmates. They didn't see him the way they saw each other. He wasn't just Sami, the smart kid. He was Sami, the outsider, the one who looked different, the one whose family didn't have the same connections or privileges. He sat down at the kitchen table, trying to suppress the unease churning in his gut. His mother placed a warm plate of flatbread and eggs in front of him, her eyes brimming with pride. "Eat well today, Sami," she said, her smile soft and encouraging. "You've worked so hard for this. Today is your day, inshallah." He nodded, picking at his food without much appetite. "I'm ready, Mama," he lied, forcing a smile. The truth was he wasn't sure if he was ready at all. Not for the test, but for everything else that seemed to come with being Sami. Every day felt like walking on a tightrope, where one wrong move could send him plunging into accusations or suspicions. But he couldn't let his mother know that. "You'll do great, I know it," his mother said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your father and I are so proud of you, always." Her words, though filled with love, only made the knot in his chest tighten. He didn't want to disappoint them, but sometimes it felt like no matter how hard he tried, the world had already made up its mind about him. The walk to school felt longer than usual. Sami's feet moved on autopilot, but his mind was elsewhere, caught between the weight of the day ahead and the burden of past experiences. He had been here before, judged without reason, scrutinized for things beyond his control. It wasn't the first time he'd felt like an outsider at his school, and he doubted it would be the last. As he entered the building, he noticed the usual stares. They weren't overt, but they were there. Lingering glances, quick whispers behind cupped hands, sideways looks that told him he didn't belong. Sami had learned to ignore them, but it never got easier. Today, of all days, he needed to focus. He made his way to his first class, slipping into his seat just as the bell rang. The room buzzed with the usual chatter, students discussing the upcoming test or weekend plans. In the corner, he noticed Adam, surrounded by a group of friends. Adam was everything Sami wasn't: confident, popular, effortlessly charismatic. His family's wealth and status meant he moved through the world with an ease that Sami could never understand. They had never spoken beyond a casual greeting, and yet Sami felt the weight of their unspoken divide. The teacher entered the room, signaling the start of the test. Sami tried to push aside the nervous energy pulsing through him and focus on the questions in front of him. But just as he began to write, the door to the classroom opened, and two school administrators walked in, their faces serious. The room fell silent. Sami looked up, confused, as one of them, a tall man in a crisp suit, murmured something to the teacher. The teacher's expression shifted from surprise to discomfort. Then, the administrator's eyes fell on Sami. "Mr. Sami, could you please come with us?" the man said, his tone calm but authoritative. Sami's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced, trying to figure out what was happening. Had he done something wrong? His palms grew clammy as he stood up, feeling every eye in the room on him. As he followed the administrators into the hallway, the knot of anxiety in his stomach tightened. They led him into a small office, where another official, a woman with graying hair, was waiting. "Sami, we need to ask you a few questions," she said, her voice measured, but her eyes held something else: doubt, suspicion. "Questions? About what?" Sami asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't fathom what this was about. The woman exchanged a glance with her colleague before responding. "There have been some items missing from the school's science lab, expensive equipment. We've received a report suggesting you might know something about it." Sami's world tilted on its axis. "What? I haven't taken anything. I don't even go to the science lab that often." The man's expression remained stoic. "We're not accusing you yet, Sami. We just need to investigate." But Sami knew better. The way they looked at him, the way they spoke, the fact that they had singled him out, it wasn't a question of whether or not they believed him. It was clear they didn't. They had already made up their minds. Back in the classroom, Adam had watched the whole thing unfold. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Kids got called out of class all the time. But then he saw the expressions on the faces of his friends, the smirks, the knowing looks. They were already assuming Sami's guilt without knowing a single fact. "Guess we all knew he'd slip up eventually," one of them muttered under their breath. "Yeah, those types always do," another whispered. Adam felt a twinge of discomfort. He didn't know Sami well, but something about the situation felt off. Was it really fair to assume the worst just because of who Sami was? Adam had never given much thought to the subtle prejudices around him. After all, they didn't affect him directly. But today, as he watched Sami being led away, a small voice in his mind whispered that maybe something wasn't right. Yet, Adam said nothing. Like so many times before, he remained silent, convincing himself it wasn't his place to get involved. Sami spent the rest of the day in a haze, trying to process what had just happened. The administrators had questioned him for hours, grilling him about the missing equipment, insinuating that he was involved despite his repeated denials. Eventually they let him go, but not before making it clear that they'd be watching him closely. Though no formal charges were brought against him, the damage had been done. By the time he returned to class the next day, the rumors had spread. His classmates no longer saw him as just Sami. Now he was Sami the suspect. The whispers followed him everywhere, casting a long, dark shadow over his once promising future. The seeds of prejudice had been planted long ago, but now they had taken root. And no matter how hard Sami tried to shake them off, he couldn't escape the weight of assumptions that others placed on him. That night, as Sami sat at the dinner table with his family, he remained quiet, lost in thought. His mother asked him how his day went, her eyes filled with love and concern. But Sami didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. Instead, he smiled weakly and said, "It was fine, Mama, just a regular day." But inside he knew nothing would ever be the same again. Years passed, and the memory of that day at school remained etched in Sami's mind like a wound that never quite healed. Though no formal punishment came from the accusations, the experience had left an indelible mark on his life. Sami had managed to graduate, though the shadows of doubt cast by his classmates never fully disappeared. He found that the assumptions people made about him, his abilities, his integrity, even his worth, were often dictated by things he had no control over: his name, the color of his skin, the cultural background he came from. Now, as an adult, Sami worked diligently at a mid-sized firm where he had started as an intern fresh out of college. He had built a reputation as reliable, intelligent, and hardworking. But despite all his efforts, Sami still felt the familiar weight of prejudice hanging over him, manifesting in subtle, insidious ways that were hard to name but impossible to ignore. He had long since learned that the world had a way of defining him before he even had a chance to speak. The office was alive with the typical Monday morning buzz. Employees greeted each other with the usual blend of excitement and wariness that came with the start of the work week. Sami sat at his desk, carefully reviewing the documents for the project he had been assigned to. It was an important one, an opportunity to finally showcase his skills on a larger scale. He had spent weeks preparing, pouring every ounce of effort into perfecting the presentation. Across the office, Adam strode in, looking as effortlessly polished as ever. His tailored suit and confident stride caught the attention of many. Adam had joined the firm a couple of years after Sami, but while Sami had worked his way up through sheer effort, Adam had been fast-tracked into a senior role, thanks to his family's connections and wealth. Adam's father was a prominent figure in the business world, and it was no secret that Adam's career path had been paved by more than just his talent. Still, Sami couldn't bring himself to resent Adam, at least not outwardly. He knew the world wasn't fair, and he had long ago accepted that some people would always have more advantages than others. But that didn't mean the inequality didn't sting. "Morning, Sami," Adam called as he passed by his desk, offering a quick nod. Sami nodded back, though their interaction remained as brief and shallow as ever. Adam, for his part, lived his life mostly unaware of the struggles Sami faced. He wasn't cruel or overtly discriminatory. If anything, Adam considered himself open-minded, someone who didn't see race or background as factors in how he treated people. But he was also blind to the privileges that cushioned his life, the invisible hand that had always guided him toward success, while others like Sami had to fight for every inch of progress. Later that week, the office was buzzing with excitement over the upcoming announcement of a new project leader. Sami had been working for months, dedicating long hours and sacrificing weekends, all in the hope of being recognized for his contributions. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The chance to step into a leadership role and finally gain the recognition he deserved. But when the announcement came, it wasn't Sami's name that was called. It was Adam's. A wave of disbelief washed over Sami as he sat at his desk, trying to process the news. How could this have happened? Adam had barely contributed to the project, while Sami had been the one overseeing every detail, ensuring that every task was completed on time and to the highest standard. The decision seemed absurd, almost laughable, except it wasn't. As the rest of the office congratulated Adam, Sami sat quietly, his mind swirling with frustration and hurt. The reality was undeniable. No matter how hard he worked, no matter how much he achieved, there would always be an invisible ceiling keeping him from rising as high as others who didn't face the same assumptions and biases. "Sami, you okay?" A voice broke through his thoughts. It was Priya, one of his closest colleagues and a friend who had seen firsthand the effort he had put into the project. "I'm fine," Sami said, forcing a smile. "Just a little surprised, that's all." Priya looked at him knowingly. Surprised or disappointed? Sami let out a sigh, his shoulders slumping. "I guess both." Priya's eyes softened with empathy. "You deserve that promotion, Sami. Everyone knows it." "Yeah, well, clearly not everyone." He tried to laugh it off, but the bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. They both fell into silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken truths hanging in the air. Priya knew as well as Sami did that this wasn't just about merit. It was about perception, about the fact that in the eyes of certain people in power, Sami would never be seen as the natural choice for leadership, no matter how qualified he was. The days that followed were hard for Sami. He kept his head down, doing his work as usual, but inside a storm was brewing. He couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how hard he tried, he would always be seen through a distorted lens. The subtle comments, the overlooked contributions, the way he was consistently passed over for promotions, it was a pattern that had followed him from his teenage years into adulthood. It wasn't just about the promotion anymore. It was about a lifetime of being judged for things beyond his control, a lifetime of working twice as hard to prove himself in a world that always seemed to find reasons to doubt him. Meanwhile, Adam moved forward with his new role, unaware of the turmoil his promotion had caused. To him, it was simply the natural next step in his career. He had worked hard too, he thought. He had put in his time. What difference did it make if he hadn't contributed as much as Sami? In Adam's mind, the promotion had been well-deserved, and any resentment from others was just part of the business world's competitive nature. But deep down, Adam had begun to feel something he couldn't quite name, a nagging sense that perhaps things weren't as fair as they seemed. He had seen the look on Sami's face when the announcement was made, had felt the tension in the air that day. Adam wasn't naive. He knew his family's influence had played a role in his rise. But what was he supposed to do about that? It wasn't his fault, was it? As the weeks went by, the gap between Sami and Adam seemed to widen. Though they worked in the same office, their lives followed vastly different trajectories. Adam, still oblivious to the full scope of the privileges he enjoyed, continued to succeed, while Sami, despite his best efforts, remained stuck, battling a system that always seemed to view him as lesser, as other. Sami's frustration grew, not just at Adam but at the world that allowed this kind of inequality to persist. He had always believed in hard work, in the idea that if he just kept his head down and did his best, success would eventually follow. But the older he got, the more he realized that hard work wasn't always enough, at least not for people like him. The bitterness that had been planted during his high school years when he was unjustly accused of theft had grown over the years. Now it was no longer just a small part of him. It was a constant companion, a quiet but persistent reminder that no matter how much he achieved, he would always be judged for things that had nothing to do with his abilities or character. And yet, Sami wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He had come too far, worked too hard, to let prejudice define him completely. But as he watched Adam rise through the ranks, he couldn't help but wonder, how much more of himself would he have to give before he could finally be seen for who he truly was? The hum of the office air conditioning seemed louder than usual as Sami sat at his desk, staring at the glowing screen in front of him. He wasn't really seeing the numbers in the spreadsheet. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in a cycle of frustration and disbelief. Adam had been in his new position for several months now, and things at the firm hadn't changed for the better. In fact, it seemed to Sami that Adam's promotion had only widened the gap between them, underscoring the reality that no matter how qualified or dedicated he was, some things were simply out of his reach. But today wasn't just another day of quiet resentment. It was a day that would change everything. It started with an email, an innocuous notification that landed in Sami's inbox mid-morning, just as he was preparing a report for his manager. The subject line was simple enough: financial inquiry, urgent. At first, he assumed it was just a routine check, something to do with a project audit or budget review. But as he read the email, his heart sank. The firm's financial department had noticed discrepancies in one of the accounts Sami had been managing. Large sums of money were missing, and somehow, all the evidence pointed to him. The accusations were serious: mishandling company funds, potential fraud, charges that could ruin his career, maybe even his life. Sami's chest tightened as he reread the message, trying to make sense of what was happening. This had to be some kind of mistake. He had always been meticulous with his work, never cutting corners, always following the proper protocols. There was no way this was true. But as he continued reading, his blood ran cold. The email ended with a notice that he had been placed on immediate suspension, pending further investigation. Suspension? He muttered to himself in disbelief, leaning back in his chair. He had never been in trouble before. Not in school, not at work, nowhere. His reputation had always been spotless, but now it felt like the floor had been ripped out from under him. For a moment, Sami sat frozen, the sounds of the office around him fading into a dull buzz. He could hear snippets of conversation, the faint tapping of keyboards, and the occasional ring of a phone. But none of it felt real. All that existed in this moment was the stark reality that his life as he knew it might be about to unravel completely. Adam, meanwhile, was sitting in a meeting with the senior management team when he got the call from his father. He excused himself from the room, stepping into the hallway to take the call, his brow furrowing in concern as he listened to his father's stern voice on the other end of the line. "You need to be careful, Adam," his father said. "There's a situation brewing in your office, something about one of your colleagues, Sami, I believe. I don't have all the details yet, but it doesn't look good." Adam's stomach churned at the mention of Sami's name. He and Sami had never been close, but Adam had always admired his work ethic from a distance. Something about this didn't sit right with him. "What kind of situation?" Adam asked, already feeling the weight of the potential fallout. He could hear the urgency in his father's voice, the undercurrent of power dynamics that came with the territory of high-level business. Apparently, there are some financial discrepancies in the accounts he was handling. Word is, it's a serious matter. Fraud, embezzlement, who knows? But listen, Adam. This is your chance to distance yourself from any trouble. You've worked hard to build your reputation, and you don't need to get mixed up in this. Adam felt a lump form in his throat. "But Just do what you need to do, son. Stay out of it. Let the investigation play out and focus on your own position." Adam hung up the phone, the cold metallic taste of dread filling his mouth. For a moment he leaned against the wall, lost in thought. His father's advice echoed in his mind, but something about it felt wrong. He didn't know all the details yet, but the idea that Sami, who had always been so diligent, could be involved in something like this seemed absurd. And yet, Adam couldn't deny the creeping feeling of self-preservation that tugged at him. This wasn't his problem. He had worked hard to get to where he was, and involving himself in Sami's situation could jeopardize everything. The next few days passed in a blur for Sami. He had been officially suspended, and the firm had launched a full investigation into the missing funds. He spent hours reviewing his own work, retracing his steps, trying to figure out how this had happened. But no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't find any mistakes on his end. The suspension weighed heavily on him, not just because of the potential consequences, but because of what it represented. It was the culmination of years of quiet discrimination, of being judged more harshly than others, of being seen as less trustworthy simply because of his background. And now it seemed that everything he had worked for, his career, his reputation, his future, was hanging in the balance. As he sat in his small apartment one evening, staring at the unopened envelope from the firm's legal department, Sami's mind drifted back to his high school years, to the first time he had been falsely accused of something he didn't do. He had been just a kid back then, unprepared for the weight of such accusations. But now, years later, he felt the same helplessness creeping in, the same disbelief that no matter how hard he tried to do everything right, the world still found a way to paint him as guilty. His phone buzzed on the table, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Priya, who had been one of the few people at the firm to reach out after the suspension. "Sami, I'm so sorry about everything that's happening. I know this isn't fair. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help." Sami stared at the message for a moment before replying. "Sami, thanks, Priya. I appreciate it. I'm just trying to figure out how this all went so wrong." He set the phone down and rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of exhaustion creeping in. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, spiritual. The exhaustion of fighting a battle he never signed up for, one that seemed to be waged against him at every turn. Meanwhile, Adam couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him since the investigation into Sami began. He had been following the developments closely, though he hadn't spoken to Sami directly. Part of him wanted to believe that Sami was innocent, that this was all some kind of misunderstanding. But another part of him, the part shaped by years of privilege and the subtle conditioning of a world that always worked in his favor, wondered if maybe there was something to the accusations. After all, people didn't just get suspended for no reason, right? But the more Adam thought about it, the more he realized that something about this whole situation didn't add up. He had seen Sami's work firsthand. He knew how careful and meticulous Sami was with every project. And yet, the firm's investigation seemed laser-focused on pinning the blame on him. As the days passed, Adam found himself torn between two forces: his loyalty to the firm and his growing suspicion that Sami was being set up. He could feel the weight of his father's influence pressing down on him, reminding him to stay out of it, to protect his own interests. But deep down, Adam knew that if he didn't do something, an innocent man's life could be ruined. The turning point came late one night, when Adam sat in his office reviewing the financial records connected to the case. He had managed to access some of the documents related to the investigation, and as he pored over them, he began to notice small discrepancies that pointed not to Sami, but to someone else entirely. It wasn't clear yet, but Adam was starting to see a pattern, one that suggested someone in the firm was framing Sami to cover their own tracks. Adam's heart raced as the realization set in. This was bigger than he had anticipated. He had two options: stay silent and let the investigation play out as it was, or risk everything: his job, his reputation, his family's standing, and speak out. He knew what his father would say. He knew what the firm expected him to do. But for the first time in his life, Adam felt the full weight of responsibility pressing down on him, not just for his own success, but for the injustice unfolding before him. Sami's life was on the line, and Adam was the only one who could help him. Adam sat in his office, the dim light from his desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The weight of what he had discovered felt almost unbearable. The documents spread out in front of him were damning. Not for Sami, but for someone else. Someone higher up in the company, someone with the power to manipulate the numbers and shift the blame. Adam had stumbled upon a trail of forged signatures and falsified documents, all of which pointed to one conclusion: Sami had been framed. The realization that his own company, his family's company, was willing to destroy an innocent man to cover up their financial mismanagement made Adam's stomach churn. He leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair as he tried to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside him. Guilt, anger, and fear battled for control. This wasn't just about right and wrong anymore. It was about his entire world: the privilege, the power, the comfort that came from being born into the right family, attending the right schools, and knowing the right people. Adam had never questioned these advantages before. He had always assumed his success was the result of his own hard work, that he had earned his place at the top. But now he could no longer ignore the reality of how rigged the system was. Sami, on the other hand, had worked twice as hard, faced constant prejudice, and still found himself at the mercy of the same system that rewarded Adam for simply being born into the right circumstances. And now, that same system was about to destroy Sami, all because he was an easy target. Adam had always told himself that he was a good person, someone who treated others fairly. But what did it mean to be a good person if he stayed silent now? If he turned his back on Sami and allowed this injustice to unfold, what did that make him? The next morning, Adam arrived at the office earlier than usual, his mind already racing with the decisions he would have to make. He needed to speak with his father. He needed to confront him about what he had found and demand answers. But the thought of going up against his father, the man who had built the company from the ground up, who had always taught Adam that loyalty to family and business came above all else, made his stomach knot with anxiety. Still, Adam knew he couldn't live with himself if he stayed silent. Later that day, he found himself standing outside his father's office, heart pounding in his chest as he knocked lightly on the door. His father's voice called from inside, telling him to come in. As Adam stepped into the room, he could feel the weight of his father's presence. The older man sat behind a large mahogany desk, his graying hair neatly combed, his eyes sharp and focused as always. "Adam, good to see you. What brings you here?" his father asked, gesturing for him to take a seat. Adam hesitated for a moment before sitting down. His palms were sweating, and he could feel the tension in the air between them. "Father?" Adam began, his voice steady but filled with unease. "I need to talk to you about Sami's case. I've been looking into the financial discrepancies that he's being accused of, and I've found some things that don't add up." His father's expression remained neutral, but Adam could see the subtle flicker of irritation in his eyes. "What exactly are you saying, Adam?" Adam swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. "I've found evidence that someone else in the company is responsible for the missing funds. It wasn't Sami. He's being framed, and I think you know that." For a moment, his father said nothing. The silence stretched on, growing heavier with each passing second. Then, finally, he leaned back in his chair, his hands folded neatly in front of him. "Adam," he said, his voice calm but cold. "You're treading on dangerous ground here. You don't understand the complexities of running a company like this. Mistakes were made, yes, but Sami is the easiest scapegoat. His suspension will save this company a great deal of trouble. We can't afford a scandal, especially not one involving someone in a higher position. The board would never allow it. Adam felt a cold wave of shock wash over him. "So you knew?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You knew he was innocent, and you're still willing to ruin his life." His father's eyes hardened. "This is business, Adam. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. Sami is expendable. If you step out of line and try to expose this, you'll only hurt yourself. The company can survive without Sami. It can't survive a scandal." Adam's hands clenched into fists in his lap, his heart racing with anger and disbelief. How could his father be so callous, so willing to destroy someone's life just to protect the company's reputation? "I can't let this happen," Adam said, his voice shaking with conviction. "I won't stand by and watch you ruin an innocent man's life." His father's expression darkened. "Adam, you need to think very carefully about what you're saying. If you go down this path, there will be consequences. Not just for Sami, but for you. You'll lose everything. Your position, your reputation, everything we've built together." Adam stood up, his legs trembling beneath him. "I don't care," he said, his voice firm. "I can't live with myself if I let this happen." His father rose from his chair, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "You're making a mistake, Adam. You're throwing away everything I've given you." Adam's heart pounded in his chest, but he refused to back down. "Maybe that's the problem," he said quietly. "Maybe I've been given too much." Without another word, Adam turned and walked out of the office, his mind spinning with the enormity of what he had just done. His father's warning echoed in his ears. You'll lose everything. But for the first time in his life, Adam didn't care. He had made his choice. That evening, Adam sat alone in his apartment, the weight of his decision settling over him. He had never felt so conflicted. On one hand, he knew he had done the right thing by refusing to stay silent. But on the other hand, he couldn't ignore the reality of what he was about to face. His father's wrath, the loss of his position at the company, the potential damage to his family's reputation, it was all coming, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. But then he thought of Sami, sitting at home, suspended from work, his reputation and career hanging in the balance. Adam knew that Sami didn't have the luxury of privilege to fall back on, didn't have the safety net that Adam's family had always provided for him. If Adam didn't do something, Sami's life could be ruined, and the injustice would go unchallenged. The next day, Adam made a decision. He gathered all the evidence he had found. The falsified documents, the forged signatures, the emails implicating someone else in the company, and went straight to the legal department. It was a risk, a huge one, but he couldn't turn back now. He handed over the evidence, explaining everything he had uncovered. The legal team listened carefully, their faces growing more serious as they realized the gravity of the situation. They assured Adam that they would look into it, but Adam knew that his actions had already set off a chain of events that couldn't be undone. Sami received the call the next morning. It was from the firm's legal department, informing him that the investigation had taken a new turn. They had found evidence clearing his name, and the suspension would be lifted immediately. Sami felt a rush of relief and disbelief wash over him as he processed the news. He was free, his career wasn't over after all. But even as the relief settled in, Sami couldn't shake the exhaustion that had come with the whole ordeal. The emotional toll of being falsely accused, of feeling like the world was stacked against him, had left scars that wouldn't heal easily. Later that week, Sami and Adam met in a small park near the office. They sat on a bench in silence for a few moments, both of them unsure of what to say. "Thank you," Sami finally said, his voice quiet but sincere. "You didn't have to do what you did. You could have stayed silent." Adam nodded, his eyes fixed on the ground. "I almost did," he admitted. "But I couldn't, not after everything I saw." Sami looked at him, the weight of years of discrimination and struggle reflected in his tired eyes. "You risked a lot," Sami said. "I know that wasn't easy for you." Adam sighed. "I lost my job. My father, well, let's just say he's not happy with me, but I couldn't live with myself if I let them do that to you." They sat in silence again, the sounds of the city buzzing faintly around them. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the park. "You did the right thing," Sami said after a while. "And that matters more than anything else." Adam nodded, though the weight of his own sacrifice still pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had lost so much: his position, his father's approval, the future he had always assumed was guaranteed. But as he sat there next to Sami, he realized that for the first time in his life, he had done something truly meaningful. Something that went beyond his own comfort and privilege. For the first time, he had stood up for justice. The weeks following the revelation had been a whirlwind of change for both Sami and Adam. The truth of the financial discrepancies had come to light, and the firm had been forced to address the scandal head-on. The individual responsible for framing Sami was quietly removed from their position, and internal reforms were promised to prevent such injustices in the future. But for Sami and Adam, the fallout was much more personal and far-reaching than any corporate press release could convey. For Sami, returning to work after being exonerated was bittersweet. The weight of the false accusations still lingered heavily on his shoulders, and although his colleagues greeted him with warm smiles and apologies, there was an undercurrent of discomfort in their interactions. Sami could feel it, the way people looked at him now, a mix of pity and relief. They were glad he had been cleared, but none of them had stood up for him when it mattered. None of them had believed in his innocence from the start. Walking through the office halls felt like stepping into a new world, one that looked the same but was irrevocably changed. People now tiptoed around him, cautious with their words, as if afraid they might say something wrong. Though the company had cleared his name, Sami knew the damage to his reputation couldn't be undone so easily. Trust, once broken, wasn't so easily repaired. And then there was the emotional toll. Sami had always prided himself on his resilience, but this experience had cut deeper than any previous wound. The fear of losing everything he had worked for, the helplessness of being falsely accused, and the isolation of feeling like no one was on his side. All of it had left scars that couldn't be seen but were felt every day. He hadn't spoken much about the ordeal to his family. They were relieved, of course, that the suspension had been lifted and that justice had finally been served. But Sami couldn't bring himself to explain how much it had shaken him. The exhaustion in his voice and the weariness in his eyes told enough of the story, and his family respected his need for space. Adam, on the other hand, had faced the full brunt of his decision to expose the truth. His father had been furious, not only because Adam had defied him, but because of the damage it had caused to their family's standing in the business world. Adam's resignation had been swift, and the fallout even swifter. His father's disappointment weighed heavily on him. An unspoken chasm had opened between them, one that Adam wasn't sure could ever be bridged. As the days passed, Adam realized how deeply intertwined his identity had been with his family's company. It wasn't just a job he had lost, it was a sense of purpose, a path that had been laid out for him since childhood. He had never questioned it before, never even considered that his life could follow a different course. But now, standing at the edge of an uncertain future, Adam felt a mix of fear and freedom. He had done the right thing, of that much he was sure. But the cost had been high, higher than he had anticipated. The relationships he had taken for granted, the privileges he had once considered normal, were gone. His friends from the business world had grown distant, unsure of how to approach him after he had publicly defied his father and the company. He was no longer the golden boy of the firm, no longer the heir to the family's empire. He was just Adam, a man trying to figure out what came next. A few weeks after the investigation had ended, Sami and Adam found themselves sitting in a cafe near the office. It wasn't the same park where they had met before, but it had the same quiet, reflective atmosphere. They hadn't seen much of each other since Adam had resigned, but both men had known that this conversation was inevitable. Sami sipped his tea thoughtfully, his eyes staring out of the window as he spoke. "It's strange, you know. I thought that once they cleared my name, everything would go back to normal, but nothing feels normal anymore." Adam nodded, understanding all too well. "I get it. I've been thinking the same thing. It's like, once you see how broken things are, it's hard to unsee it. Even if justice is served, the damage doesn't just disappear." Sami turned to look at him, his expression unreadable. "You lost a lot because of what you did. Your job, your family's approval." "I lost what I thought I wanted," Adam interrupted, shaking his head. But maybe it was never really mine to begin with. I grew up thinking that my life was supposed to go a certain way, that I was entitled to certain things just because of who my father is. But after what happened to you, I realized how wrong that was. I don't want to be part of a world that thrives on injustice, even if it means losing everything. Sami nodded slowly. I appreciate what you did, Adam. I really do. But I still can't shake the feeling that no matter what we do, the system will always be against people like me. Adam leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. Maybe, but we can't stop trying. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that silence only makes it worse. I stayed silent for too long, thinking that things would change on their own or that it wasn't my place to interfere. But that's not how it works. If we don't speak up, nothing changes. Sami sighed, the weight of his experiences pressing down on him. I've been speaking up my whole life, Adam, and it feels like it never makes a difference. But it did this time, Adam said gently. You didn't give up. You fought back, even when everything seemed stacked against you. And because of that, you won. Maybe the change isn't as big or as immediate as we'd like, but it's there. It starts with small victories. Sami considered his words, his gaze distant. He had been fighting for as long as he could remember, against prejudice, against assumptions, against a world that had never fully accepted him. And while the battle felt endless, there was something about Adam's words that rang true. This time, he hadn't fought alone. This time, someone had stood with him. In the weeks that followed, both men began to rebuild their lives, though in very different ways. For Sami, returning to work was a slow process of regaining trust and finding a new sense of normalcy. He knew that he would always be seen differently, that the scars from his ordeal would never fully fade. But he also knew that he wasn't alone anymore. Adam's actions had shown him that there were people willing to fight alongside him, even if the odds seemed insurmountable. For Adam, the future was less clear. He no longer had the safety net of his family's company or the privilege of a clear path laid out before him. But for the first time in his life, he felt free to chart his own course, to build something that was truly his. He had lost much, but he had gained something far more important: his integrity, his sense of purpose, and the knowledge that he had done the right thing when it mattered most. Months later, Sami and Adam met once again, this time at a small gathering hosted by a local community group dedicated to promoting equality in the workplace. Sami had been invited to speak about his experiences, and Adam had come to support him. As Sami stood in front of the small audience, his voice steady and clear, he spoke about the challenges he had faced, the injustices he had endured, and the importance of standing up for what was right. But he also spoke about hope, about the small but meaningful victories that could lead to larger changes, about the power of solidarity, and about the courage it took to challenge a system that seemed unchangeable. Adam watched from the back of the room, a quiet smile on his face. He knew that both he and Sami had been forever changed by the events of the past year. Their paths had diverged in many ways, but in this moment they were united by the shared understanding that justice, though often elusive, was worth fighting for. As the applause filled the room at the end of Sami's speech, Adam felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had both lost something in the battle for justice, but they had gained something far more valuable: a sense of purpose, of belonging, of knowing that they had made a difference, however small. And as they walked out of the building together, the evening air cool and refreshing, both men knew that while the road ahead would not be easy, it was a road they were willing to walk. Together. Years later, Sami looked back on that turbulent period of his life with a sense of quiet reflection. He had moved on from the firm and was now working with organizations that focused on promoting fairness and opportunity for people from marginalized backgrounds. His experiences had shaped him, yes, but they had also strengthened his resolve to make sure that others wouldn't have to endure the same battles alone. As for Adam, he had found a new path, one that was less certain but far more fulfilling. He had redefined his life, moving away from the world of corporate privilege and dedicating himself to causes that mattered. His relationship with his father remained strained, but Adam had found peace in knowing that he had chosen integrity over convenience. And as the years passed, the echoes of their decisions reverberated through their lives, shaping them in ways they never could have predicted. In the end, justice had been served, not just in the clearing of Sami's name, but in the realization that standing up for what is right, no matter the cost, is the true measure of a person's character. The world had changed for them both, but they had changed the world in their own small, powerful way. And that, Sami thought, was all the justice they could have hoped for. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.